This is the Mary Celeste, the ship that vanished for over 150 years. The wind howls, waves rise and fall, the sails creak. Crew members move about, securing ropes, adjusting the sails. Inside the captain's cabin, a pen scratches against paper as Captain Benjamin Briggs writes in his log. A cup of coffee steams beside him. The crew's plates are half filled with bread and meat, and everything is normal. The ship tilts slightly. The crew grips the railings. A strange low hum vibrates through the deck. Captain Briggs turns to his first mate, eyes narrowed. "Do you feel that?" The compass spins wildly. The sails twitch, though there's no wind. A crewman shouts from the bow, "Captain, look at the water." Something isn't right. The water beneath the ship is bubbling. A massive, unseen force seems to pull at the ship. The boards creak under pressure. Then, silence. Only the sound of waves lapping gently. The Mary Celeste is now eerily adrift, completely abandoned. Plates of food sit half-eaten. A single chair rocks slowly in the wind. The captain's log remains open, but his last entry is unfinished. The ship was found like this, days later. But no one knows what happened before the silence. What force took them? Why did they leave? And most importantly, why after 150 years does no one have an answer? The Mary Celeste was born from timber and iron, built to withstand the wrath of the Atlantic. Yet, from the moment she touched the water, the sea seemed determined to reject her. She was constructed in 1861 in Spencer's Island, Nova Scotia, a sleek and sturdy brigantine designed for speed, endurance, and long voyages across treacherous waters. At the same time, no one could have predicted that she would go down as one of the greatest mysteries in maritime history. But those who sailed here knew something was off. Ships have souls, sailors say, and from the start the Mary Celeste was restless. She was originally christened the Amazon, and before she could complete her first real voyage, tragedy struck. Her very first captain, Robert Leyan, died suddenly from an illness, barely days after taking command. It was a bad omen, but the ship continued on. Soon after, she collided with a fishing boat in the narrows of the East River, sustaining damage that forced repairs. Then, as if cursed by the ocean itself, she suffered a fire on board, followed by a near-total wreck of the coast of Cape Breton. Over and over, she was patched up and sent back out, but she seemed incapable of a peaceful voyage. To sailors, there was no denying it, the Amazon was an unlucky ship. By 1867, she was left to rot, abandoned after running aground in a storm. Most ships would have been scraped for wood, their bones scattered across the shipyard, but this one refused to die. A group of investigators saw potential in the wreck and purchased the broken ship, giving her a second chance. They rebuilt her, strengthening her hull and increasing her cargo space, and in an effort to wipe her past clean, they gave her a new name, Mary Celeste. But renaming a ship was one of the worst superstitions among sailors. The belief was that the ship's name carried its fate, and to erase it, it was no longer the spirits of the sea. Some whispered that the Mary Celeste would never be free from the disasters of her past, and as history would show, they were right. By 1872, she had changed hands multiple times, never staying with one owner for long. No one wanted to hold onto her. Some said she was too unreliable. Others felt she carried bad luck. But eventually, a new captain took command, a man who did not believe in curses. His name was Benjamin Briggs, and he was about to embark on his final voyage. Captain Benjamin Briggs was a man with a strict sense of duty, respected both for his impeccable record and his commitment to his family. He was a veteran of the seas, having spent years navigating some of the most dangerous waters known to man. His reputation was ironclad, The men who worked with him trusted his every command. His decision to bring his family on this voyage was out of character. Most captains of his stature would never risk their loved ones on such perilous journey. But Briggs had no doubts about the Mary Celeste. She was his vessel and he had faith that nothing would go wrong. Sarah Briggs, his wife, was no stranger to the ocean. She had traveled with Benjamin on several occasions, though this journey would be her longest. She wasn't a sailor by trade, but her presence on board was crucial to the captain's peace of mind. Her role was as much about supporting her husband and maintaining a calm, steady atmosphere as it was about the voyage itself. Sarah's gentle nature was a stark contrast to the harsh conditions of the sea. And there was Sophia, their 2-year-old daughter, who had never known a life outside of the decks of a ship. She was too young to understand the dangers they were sailing toward. Her innocence, unmarked by the weight of the ocean's threats, might have been the most tragic part of the story in hindsight. The Mary Celeste's mission was straightforward: transport 1,700 barrels of denaturated alcohol from Newark to Genoa, Italy. The cargo was valuable, used primarily for industrial purposes, as a solvent in the production of varnish paint and other chemicals. The shipment wasn't unusual. Similar loads were transported across the Atlantic on a regular basis. What made the mission stand out, however, was the size of the cargo and the dangerous nature of the alcohol, which was highly flammable. The barrels were tightly secured in the ship's hold, but the potential for disaster was always present. Preparations for the journey began well before the ship departed. Weeks before leaving Newark, the crew had already begun their tasks, securing the cargo, provisioning the ship, and ensuring everything was in order. First, Ring was tasked with overseeing the loading of the alcohol. Ring was a steady, experienced man who had sailed with Briggs on several prior journeys. He knew the importance of ensuring the cargo was stowed properly, as even the slightest mistake would lead to disaster. Edward Williams, the second mate, was responsible for the ship's navigation. Williams was no stranger to these waters, having spent years working on merchant ships, and his calm demeanor made him a good fit for the challenging job. Once the cargo was stowed and the provisions packed, the ship was ready. Food and water were rationed for a journey that could last several months. Although the ship had the capability to carry more cargo, Briggs ensured that the balance between provisions and cargo space was carefully considered. He ordered the crew to check the rigging, sails, and hull, ensuring that no last-minute adjustments were needed before setting out to the sea. As the Mary Celeste pulled away from Newark Harbor on November 7, 1872, the skies were clear and the wind was at their backs. The ship cut through the water smoothly, the crew working in harmony and Briggs standing at the helm with a steady hand. Everything appeared perfect. There was a certain peace in the air that day, an unspoken calm among the crew that suggested this voyage would be no different to the dozens before it. But as they sailed out of sight of land, something unseen began to stir. The crew had no way of knowing that their seemingly routine journey would be the beginning of a mystery that would never be solved. The sky was dull grey on December 5th, 1872, when the British merchant ship De Gratia crested the lazy swell in the North Atlantic. The sea was calm, unnervingly so, just a vast stretch of muted blue, the kind that makes every shadow feel heavier. From the quarterdeck, Captain David Morehouse spotted a vessel drifting about 500 miles west of Portugal. At first glance, it was a schooner, sails partly raised but slammed and trembling, like the ship was caught mid-motion and had simply stopped. Morehouse, sharp-eyed and seasoned, noticed something wasn't right. The ship wasn't responding to signals. It seemed adrift, uncommanded. As they drew nearer, he recognized the name painted in weathered letters on the stern, Mary Celeste. His stomach throbbed. He knew that ship. He knew its captain. Benjamin Briggs had shared dinner with him just weeks earlier in Newark. Suspicion turned to alarm. He ordered First Mate Oliver Devo and a small boarding crew to investigate. The men rowed toward the ghostly vessel in a longboat, cutting through the flat waters. As they climbed aboard, their boots echoed on the empty deck. The ropes creaked faintly in the wind. Sails fluttered half loose, but there was no voice, no movement, no life. Just an eerie stillness. Below deck, they found no one. Not Briggs, not his wife, not the child, not a single crewman. There was no sign of a fight, no fire, and no blood. The galley still had warm ashes in the stove, and a half-eaten breakfast sat rotting on the mess table. Cabins were in order, beds made, boots neatly stored. There were even personal items left behind, such as watches, rings, clothing, belongings no sailor would leave unless they had no choice. One lifeboat was missing. That much was clear. The compass housing was broken, the navigational equipment slightly disturbed, but there was no damage to suggest a storm or piracy. 9 barrels of alcohol in the cargo hold were found empty. Odd, but not catastrophic. The rest of 1,500 barrels were untouched. The ship's cargo was largely intact, as were the ship's papers, saved for the logbook, which ended 10 days before the ship was found, with nothing unusual written in its final pages. Devo later wrote that the whole ship had the air of a place just vacated, like someone had stood up mid-task and simply vanished. There were no torn clothes, no signs of madness or mutiny, just a lingering quiet that clung to the walls. Captain Morehouse decided to split his crew, sailing both ships to Gibraltar. As he took command of the derelict vessel, the weight of the mystery pressed on him. It wasn't just that the crew had vanished, it was how they had vanished. Why would Briggs, a careful man, abandon his ship in calm seas? Why would he take his wife and child in a single lifeboat into the vast Atlantic without calling for help? These weren't answers waiting in the hold. They were swallowed by the water, pulled beneath the waves, never to be seen again. And so the Mary Celeste continued its journey, this time without a soul aboard, carried by the wind and haunted by a silence no one could explain. On December 13, 1872, after days of ferry coast sailing, the Mary Celeste arrived at the port of Gibraltar, under a sky weighted with clouds. The British brig, the Gratia, which had discovered her abandoned at sea, entered alongside, one ship empty and one full of questions. Word spread quickly through the harbor. A ghost ship had arrived with not a single soul aboard. Captain David Morehouse reported everything: the drifting schooner, the lifeboat missing, the untouched cargo, the ship itself, still seaworthy. At first it seemed like a salvage operation, strange but clean. But then came the officials. Papers were examined, rooms were searched. Something about the silence of the ship, its stillness, made even the most hardened seamen uneasy. The British authorities launched a formal maritime inquiry, led by Attorney General Frederick Solly Flood, a man known for being meticulous, even theatrical. His suspicion was immediate. Something wasn't adding up. Why had the crew vanished but left everything in order? Why hadn't there been a distress signal? He suspected criminal intent, perhaps murder, perhaps fraud. His eyes turned to Morehouse and his man. They stood to gain a large salvage reward. What better motive? But no evidence could be found. No blood, no signs of violence, no damage to the hull or rigging beyond natural wear. There was no log of a storm, no hint of piracy. Solly Flood studied the ship for days, yet the only physical oddities were a disassembled pump, some scratches near the bow, and a broken compass box. The cargo, denatured alcohol, was nearly untouched, save for 9 barrels, which were thought to have leaked, not stolen. Every new piece of information deepened the riddle. The last logbook entry had been written on November 25, 9 days before the ship was found. It placed the Mary Celeste near the Azores, far from where she was eventually found drifting. What had happened in that gap of silence? Why had no one updated the log since? Crew belongings remained where they had always been. Captain Briggs' nautical instruments were still in his cabin. His diary was there, undisturbed. Even the child's toys, soft and worn, lay on her bunk untouched. The ship didn't just feel abandoned, it felt paused, like its story had been interrupted mid-chapter. For weeks, the court turned to the ship inside out, hunting for a definitive cause, but there was nothing. No human remains, no fingerprints, just a lingering mystery of absence, haunting every board, every rope, every rusted hinge. When the investigation concluded, it left more open than it closed. The salvage reward was eventually given to the crew of the De Gratia, but it was far less than they expected. A quiet insult weighted down by suspicion. And so the Mary Celeste was released. But the story never left, because when a ship arrives with no crew, no damage, and no explanation, the ship doesn't just deliver wooden sails. It delivers a question that refuses to be answered. For over 150 years, the mystery of the Mary Celeste has refused to fade. Like waves in the dark, the theories rise and fall, some grounded in reason, others drifting into the fantastical, but all of them circle the same haunting question: why did 10 souls vanish from a ship that was still afloat? Among the most accepted explanations is one born from the ship's cargo. The Mary Celeste was carrying over 1,700 barrels of denaturate alcohol, a volatile industrial substance. When investigators opened the hold, they found that 9 barrels had leaked. Some speculate that fumes may have been shipped upward, invisible and suffocating. Fearing an explosion, Captain Briggs could have ordered an evacuation, a temporary escape to the lifeboat, tethered to the ship by rope. But what if the rope snapped? What if the ocean pulled them just far enough, silently, relentlessly, until the ship disappeared over the horizon? It sounds plausible, but those who knew Briggs described him as cautious, composed, not the type to abandon sea without absolute cause. And if it was a temporary decision, why take his wife and child with him? Solely flawed believed in murder. Others have echoed the same. Could it have been mutiny, a rebellion sparked by fear, hunger, or madness? Yet the personal belongings left aboard speak against it. Could it have been pirates? The 19th century still saw maritime attacks, but no valuables were missing. No blood, no struggle. If violence took place, it left no scar behind. And then there's the theory that points fingers at the Decratia, that Morehouse and his men may have been orchestrated the disappearance for profit. But it would have taken precise timing, enormous risk, and left zero evidence behind. Even solely flawed suspension eventually dissolved into thin air. Others blame the sea itself. A wooden waterspout, slicing through the ship like a phantom, could have filled it with enough water to cause panic, or perhaps a seaquake knocked the vessel hard enough to feel like the hull had cracked. Some even suggested a rogue wave washed over the deck, sweeping crew members into the water in a matter of seconds. But again, the ship was found intact. The sails weren't shredded, the deck wasn't torn apart, nature left no signature. And then the stories begin to drift into legend, into myth, into the shadows, where no logbook dares to go. Some say the Mary Celeste was cursed, doomed by an unknown force. Others whispered about sea monsters, or ghosts, or even alien abduction, decades before the term was ever coined. The ship's eerily perfect condition, the untouched meals, the absence of distress, it reads like fiction. Too strange, too clean. Some believe it never happened, that is an embellished sailor's tale that grew taller with time. But the ship was real, the crew was real, the silence that followed them was real. To this day, there is no final answer. The Mary Celeste remains one of the most enduring unsolved maritime mysteries in history. Every theory adds a new layer, but none can peel back the last veil. The ocean keeps its secrets. Maybe that's the most unsettling truth of all.